Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 6th, 2026 meeting of the Media Ed Club for the Media Education Lab. My name is Wes Fryer, and I am coming to you from Culpeper, Virginia, where we have been on a holiday break, and I've jumped into a Starbucks. So pairs the bandwidth and the connectivity is good. We've got folks, as usual, joining us from all over. So our session today is on AI, news, and education, and I'm really excited that we're welcoming members of the Verity team from MIT to share with us the backstory of what they have been doing for a number of years with Improve the News and challenging us to think about how we interrogate the news and how we're teaching that with our students. So today's format is going to be the same as usual. We want to encourage you to use the chat. Let us know who you are, where you are, and what you're doing professionally. Also, if you want to put in any comments about how you filter your news, any links that you share, we'll try to share out in the shared document that we have for our Media Ed Club meetups, and we'll also try to include links to those in the YouTube archive. We'll just have a couple announcements today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Emma and the Verity team to kind of take it away. And they've got a slideshow prepared, and we'll just kind of see how our time goes. If we've got some time, hopefully we'll be able to have some breakout room time, and then we'll come back to a whole group sharing time if we can. So last time with Lucy Gray, we kind of went long, and we had a smaller group, and we just stayed in whole group the whole time. But we'll kind of play that by ear. But I do want to let everybody know that you can go to this website, our shared Google Doc, and it is our Media Ed Club. Try to click it again. I'll just drop the whole link in there. Basically, that link that is sometimes available there in a shortened version is available, and it has all of our archived presentations, the descriptions, all of that. And I apologize that I am going to struggle a little bit today with my single screen. I am very spoiled and usually getting to be on double screens, and that's not happening today. But I also want to give a shout out to encourage anyone who is interested to utilize this Google form, and I'll drop this link in a little bit later as well, so I don't have to jump out of my slideshow. But there is so much value in us filtering not only news, but other links and resources for each other. And there are a lot of folks working on this kind of a challenge. How do we create and curate communities in which we're able to share resources? We at the Media Lab are using a group inside LinkedIn now, but one of the things that's challenging about LinkedIn is that it is a proprietary and closed space. And so there are some other places where you can share, like Blue Sky or Mastodon, even YouTube, that create feeds and allow us to be able to view those in different platforms. And so anyway, that link is there in the slideshow, and I'll drop that link in a little bit later. I want to remind everybody to please visit our events page for the Media Education Lab. You can find that at mediaeducationlab.com/events. Coming up later this week on April 8th, we have a session on truth, tech, and transformation. We've got the watch party coming up on tax day for the documentary, Mr. Nobody Against Putin. And then at the end of the month on April 27th, we have another meeting of the Together We Rise community. So great events to take part of, and all of those are available on our events page. As just a very brief background, I want to share with you all that this past month, at the beginning of March, I had the opportunity to share a presentation for the Thrive Conference, which the Media Lab was a formal partner for. And the focus of this whole conference is building bridges for democratic resilience through cross-sector collaboration. So it really brought together a lot of folks, not just educators, but others as well. And the topic of my presentation was reclaiming our news feeds, thinking about the way that we can be very intentional and very deliberate in the selection of the news feeds that we choose to read and listen to and watch. And then also thinking about how we might be able to, use vibe coding, or if you just know about coding or other kinds of tools, how do we reclaim our news feeds? How do we do that with intention? And so I'd invite you, if you're interested, to check out that presentation and just join in this conversation, because I really feel like today's session for the Media Ed Club builds on a lot of those ideas. And there are other folks within the Thrive community, which you can find at thriveedu.substack.com, that are wrestling and grappling with these same kinds of issues, because one of the big factors in the polarized political landscape that we live in today are the news sources that we have, and the ways in which those news sources present information, and the challenges that are now presented because of different perceptions and different worlds that we sometimes live in. And so I think Verity, that we're going to learn about today, offers some really powerful tools and a great platform, and a lot to think about as we consider all of those questions. So I want to turn the podium over to Emma Solendica, no S. I'm trying to learn my Greek. So I'm going to turn it over to Emma. I'm going to stop my share, and she has members of her community there for Verity, Anna, two Annas, Anna Silva, Anna Henning, and also Jeremy Gardner, that are going to participate in today's presentation. So please help me in welcoming Emma and the team from Verity. Go ahead, Emma.
All right. Yes, so we have our team today. Today we're going to be talking. I feel like Wes gave a really good introduction, kind of understanding where our news is coming from. And we're not only going to do that from an educational perspective, as we have our educational branch, which is Verity Ed, but we're also going to be looking at other kind of factors that play into how we represent the news at Verity News. So Jeremy Garner is a digital curator with us at Verity, and Annalisa Hennig is our senior editor. So I think it's great that they're here to join. If you have any questions for them, they'll be right here to answer, and I think they can give you some really detailed answers. They also worked with the on the presentation with me, and they were very, very helpful. So I'm very excited to get started. Shall I begin?
Yes, if you want to go ahead and share your screen. And I want to encourage everybody, please use the back channel. If you're not familiar, we are a very chatty group oftentimes. And so ask your questions in the channel. We might give some of those voice as we go through the presentation. And yeah, take it away, Emma. And I'll take over the admitting for our additional folks who are joining. So don't worry about that.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's begin. As I said, we're going to be going over AI, news, and education. And more particularly, we're going to be looking into the question of who is building your news platforms. I want to start by sort of asking everyone, where do you get your news? And I kind of want to ask everyone this to sort of like share in the chat, sort of, where are you looking? Are you looking on traditional news sources? Is it something that you're searching? Is it something that you're getting on social media?
And while we wait for those to kind of come in, we can give those voice, and if you want to put those in the chat. I know I've definitely used and encouraged my students to use Google News quite a bit, as far as its different sources, and the fact that you can click a button there within Google News to see, different news sources that are covering the same issue. And that's been something that I've been doing for a number of years.
Mm-hmm. I think usually I see a sort of mix here. It's like searching. A lot of people who are younger use social media. Some people share in their group chats. They listen to podcasts, maybe a newsletter. Sometimes it's just what crosses your feed. So I feel like that's kind of what we're seeing.
In the
Some
chat, we're saying,
Substack as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
podcast, news apps, newsletters,
Mm-hmm.
NBC, BBC, Le Monde, in English. I guess is that a French? I don't know Le Monde.
Yeah.
Al Jazeera English, NPR, Wall Street Journal, Blue Sky.
All right. And we also have some print newspapers too, which is pretty great. I think Le Monde means the globe in French. But yeah. And I have a second question as well, which is what to you makes this news trustworthy? So why are we trusting these news sources and not trusting other ones that might make us more skeptical?
And I know as we wait for some comments to come in on the chat, I know as I talked with my students about this, a lot of times it's authority. I'm teaching middle school
Mm-hmm.
students, but places oftentimes where parents are watching things. But of course, TikTok and social media and video-based sources are really taking a more dominant role for a lot of our students. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily as much for adults, but it definitely is for students and the influencers that students are watching.
Mm-hmm. Lauren trusts editors, so Anna over here is getting a nice shout out. The code of ethics is really important. That's absolutely true.
Alexandria is saying the source plays a big
Yeah,
role. Standards-based
standards
newspapers.
based. Yeah, I think this really follows what I see a lot, which is people often say they trust this transparency, sourcing, consistency, some context, following actual journalistic principles, which ensure that there is that, you know, sticking to honesty. I think, though, it's important to also see, apart from this room, which is probably some people who are news interested people, what the rest of the world thinks. So here's a study from the Pew Research Center, and it shows here that 53% of adults say they get their news sometimes from social media, which is kind of a lot more than we saw in this room. At the same time, this Gallup study here found that Americans' trust in mass media in 2025 was at 28%. So we have two trends happening at once. We see that there's declining trust in traditional mass media, but there's also increasing reliance on social platforms for news. And this pattern is even more pronounced when we look at younger groups of people. If you look at the ages 18 to 49, we can see that over half of them get their political news because it's something that they happen to come across and not because it was something that they were actively looking for. So, especially in younger people, news is something encountered incidentally and it's not something that's encountered deliberately. So, news is becoming increasingly ambient. It's showing up next to memes, creator content, text, entertainment. It's influenced by algorithmic recommendations. We see that platform literacy or understanding the platforms that we're reading things on are not that separate from news literacy anymore. And we also see a broader echo of this. Generally, there was a Council of Europe study in Moldova. They found that 64% of respondents got their news from social media, but 70% also said it's exactly these platforms that they think are the causes of disinformation and misinformation. So again, we see a tension where people are relying on these social media platforms even more, but they also recognize them as these major vectors of misleading information. And this puts a lot of pressure on educators because you're being asked to help students access or navigate the system that they have more and more access to, but they don't feel that confident in it. They don't feel like verification is really there. They don't necessarily adhere to the SPJ principles, for example. So, what does this mean for the way that we consume the news? It means that a lot more people are encountering news in environments that are designed for engagement and not necessarily for accuracy, for context, or for reflection. So, the key point here is platforms are, at the end of the day, designed for engagement. It doesn't mean that everything on social media is false. It just means that we have to understand the logic of distribution here. When you have a system that's rewarding speed, it's rewarding, clicks and views and likes or outrage. These are the conditions that shape how younger people are encountering news and also interpreting news. So then one of the central questions for educators becomes, do we just teach students to read the content, or do we also teach them to understand the systems and the platforms that are delivering it? And this sort of brings us to the central thesis for this, which is we can't begin by asking, is this platform good or bad, or is this source good or bad? But we also have to start one step earlier, which is understanding who is behind this platform. Why does this platform exist? Does this platform use AI? How is it using AI? And for teachers, it's what does responsible use of this resource look like in a classroom? These are the questions that kind of give way to the architecture behind the information and reveal a little more than just good, bad. So with this question in mind, we're going to turn to a simple case study, which is looking at the Improve the News Foundation and all of our different resources and seeing how we balance AI automation and human judgment. As we move through Verity, Orwell, and Verity Ed, it's not just to describe what they are, but to answer these questions about the platform that we are building here. So we're going to start sort of with the origin to give an overview, especially for those who don't know what it is. So in 2020, in October 2020, it was founded. In 2022, there's a seminal machine learning media bias paper that sort of starts building the idea of what we will be doing when we publish our news in 2022. We rebranded as Verity in 2023, and we also started launching stories at our satirical counterpart, Orwell, in 2023. And then finally, in 2025, we launched Verity Ed, which is the kind of learning and educational branch of all of this. So it's important here that we understand that this is just some websites that are appearing out of nowhere, but this ecosystem that we're growing that's kind of aimed at a particular diagnosis of what the media ecosystem looks like right now. So, as I said earlier, one of the first questions that we should ask is who made this? Where do they come from? Why are they doing this? So we're going to start by answering these sort of questions. So we were founded by MIT professor Max Tegmark and Tufts researcher Miyashita Tegmark, and their goal here was to improve the news. And we see that this 2022 paper helps explain where their response comes from. It tried to map media bias across two axes, the left and right, and the establishment bias, and it did this using machine learning across a very large article set of over 1 million articles. So this tells us something very important, that this mission sort of starts with the belief that media patterns can be studied systematically at scale, and that computational tools or tools that aren't human might actually help make these patterns more visible in real time. So instead of having one small person who has to code every word that we're seeing, you can actually use a machine to do this, and it makes the job of the humans a lot more easier in determining bias either on the left-right scale or the establishment scale. And it's from this that this ecosystem sort of builds. So we have Verity, which is the journalism layer, it's the aggregation layer. We have coverage, we have facts, we reveal narratives, we reveal patterns. And then we have Orwell, which is to surface Orwellian tendencies in modern day like democracies and others. It's showing you propaganda and rhetoric that's being used. And Verity Ed acts as the pedagogical layer. It tells you take these issues and how can we translate them into classroom inquiry? So these aren't unrelated projects, but more so three different responses to the same underlying problem that we're seeing. So let's begin by looking a little bit more into Verity. So Verity is completely free. It was founded by the Improve the News Foundation, and it's apolitical and it's a nonprofit. And its main kind of issue that it's doing is countering the misuse of artificial intelligence. And the way we do that is not just by using AI productivity tools, but having our team of journalists work with them in order to provide the complete nuanced truth behind every story. We follow these four pillars right here, which are scientific truth seeking, political impartiality, privacy and security, which means we remain ad-free and completely free. And at the end of the day, this all should lead to empowerment of the reader to understand the news and take hold of the news that they're reading in their own way. And at its core, we see that we're responding to a world where people feel overwhelmed by AI-shaped information systems. So this distinction is important because once we say AI is an assistant rather than a substitute, the obvious next question becomes, what is it assisting for? What exactly is it doing? And where are humans still involved in this? The first answer here is scale. So what we do at Verity is the first step is we do news data aggregation. Every day, our AI models aggregate news data from over 5,400 sources. And these are old and new media outlets. And we do this obviously with the help of AI tools. Obviously, we can ask which sources are included, which aren't, what counts as a source that is worth reading in the first place. Second on, we move to news data classification. Here, what happens is that AI models classify news sources on the two aforementioned axes. So we have the left-right political bias, and then we also have the pro-establishment critical bias. And another thing our editorial team can do is employ an AI tool that scrapes the internet based on keywords, and it finds related articles. So it essentially groups articles, it identifies themes, and it maps sources along these axes. And this is genuinely useful because it helps users see patterns that might be hard to notice when you're only reading one article at a time. Obviously, classification shapes interpretation. Once we see how stories relate to each other or how outlets are positioned, it's also framing a way of seeing it, which is important to consider. Finally, we get into the most important part, and this is where the platform has the human role where it really remains central. AI helps generate drafts here, but it's our human editors and our digital curators that are really reviewing it. This is sort of the heart of the conversation because the hardest part may not be producing language, but the hardest part that our humans do is judgment. What counts as evidence? What counts as framing? What deserves emphasis? What information is uncertain? And what should be noticed about this process? So all of our stories contain facts and narratives. Our facts are what really happened. So if someone really did say something and something that has been agreed upon by sources who aren't on the same side of the spectrum, and also what people are saying about it. Our glossary has over 22 narratives that range from political parties like Republicans, Democrats. It can also be establishment, anti-establishment, pro-Israel, anti-Israel. We want to make sure that it covers many different perspectives. And it's exactly this sort of system that brought us to be the most balanced news source that's in the United States right now. So we got an all sides certified for being the most balanced news source. And if you see us here with some of the news sources that even you mentioned, we're at a rating of 0.28. So we're very, very close to being at zero. And that's something that obviously is part of our ethos. One of our pillars is political impartiality. And that's something that we really try to do. We want you to be able to come to news and not feel like you're being told a perspective, but that you can identify the perspectives yourself. So once we understood sort of what the workflow is, you'll see that I was asking some questions. For example, how do you choose what sources are included? Or what does that mean for me when I'm looking at the sources that you're looking at? So we'll kind of go over what features our platform Verity has and see what kind of reading that the platform encourages. If it pushes towards speed and certainty, or does it invite comparison, reflection, or interpretation? What does it mean when all of these news stories separate facts from narratives, and what assumptions are built into this distinction? So if you look on our main page here, you'll see that we have evergreen context stories, deep dives, and reviews for books. What these enable you to do is slow the experience down. Not every story has to be a hot take or a headline, but some stories need history, structure, and an understanding of competing interpretations across time. These kinds of features support really reflective reading, especially if they're framed in classrooms as opportunities to investigate rather than consume. So if you're trying to teach your students or teach someone in your life about the Gaza war and its aftermath, our deep dive enables you to go through that step by step and really understand the process a little bit more. We also have a bias split tool, and this might be the clearest media literacy example in the platform. So you'll see here that what we do is we offer a split, so you yourself can choose if you want to look at these, from The Conversation or The Atlantic or Al Jazeera, if you want it to appear more left, if you want it to appear more critical. And it makes these ideological and establishment differences really, really visible. This helps students compare how different outlets might be framing the exact same issue instead of mistaking one version for the whole picture, but it also helps you compare patterns that you kind of assume as a reality. It's a really useful research tool if you're someone who's trying to either talk about something in a media analysis way or if it's something that you're just curious about. It also just shows that visualization can sometimes be a really clear way at understanding how bias is presented, either from a source or what particular stories are being presented. We also have a sources feature here. So we have our public figures. So we have Brandon Beach here. We can have Donald Trump, which you can search yourself. And we also have the option to search for organizations. And you can see here their quotes, their stances on controversies, stories that are related to them. It gives you a short biography, and it also gives you a bias that is determined by AI and then checked by Verity's editorial team. I think this is particularly important when it comes to students because understanding accountability in democracies is crucial. When you have a platform that you can just log on to and see exactly what was said by which public figure, you kind of have this trace of accountability that you can show your students or show different people when you're talking about the news.
Emma, can I ask you to go back to the slide before? Talk a little bit about the establishment, pro-establishment, because I guess that was something new to me, and it's
Hmm.
not just a left and right. So can you
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, as you saw in the initial paper, it was mapped not across just the left and the right, which is the traditional political bias that we look at, but it's also establishment critical and pro-establishment. So, this is something that we do different than a lot of news aggregators because we look at that dimension as well. What this might mean is if you're looking at an article that's kind of criticizing the US government or a lot of, the major governments of the world, that's something that would probably be deemed more establishment critical because they're criticizing what is already established, what the status quo is, what the governing bodies are doing. Whereas if you see a perspective that's more so agreeing with it, that's something that is determined to be establishment critical. And this a lot of the times comes from more new media sources. It's very interesting to see how we have a lot of Substack articles or Medium articles that are kind of discussing more personal perspectives on why they're criticizing, for example, the US government for um, enacting conflict or doing something else in that sort. I'm sure that Anna can also provide a little more detail into how that's determined on their end. I'm not sure if that answered the question
Nope,
well.
that's good. That's good. That was something I wanted to also highlight because it was something I wasn't familiar with and I thought was
Hmm.
interesting in terms of how the whole grid and the framework is set up. And I totally
Hmm.
agree with Substack, with so many independent journalists today. that's great. That's exciting, but it also makes things even more challenging, I guess, with the additional sources and not necessarily having a name like a New York Times or
Hmm.
whatever behind somebody.
Yeah, we try to get as many sources as possible, and we're constantly trying to expand that. I'm sure Jeremy, who's on the digital curation team, can kind of talk about that a little bit more as well. But yeah, we have our sources here. And this is a really interesting kind of AI fact, or automation fact, which is that although in the beginning, all of the Verity profiles were created manually by the digital curation team, there's now an automation pipeline that creates them to 90 to 95% completion. And then a human, all they have to do is check it and finish it off. So this means that the information that you're looking at is a lot more complete, and you have a lot more profiles to look at. We also have controversies. I think this is probably one of the most easy things to turn into a lesson by making it a debate. So it's the same way that you see with public figures. You see a controversy here, like, will China's CO2 emissions peak in 2025? And they always scale from unlikely to likely. And if you click on it, you can also see in detail what each of these organizations, like it could be a news organization, it could be um, a policy figure, it could be a celebrity, whatever, whoever is talking about it, you can click on it and see what was actually being said. I think a fun activity here is to get into the perspective of one of these figures, kind of map out what they've said, and see if you can argue from their perspective, whether it's likely or unlikely. So that's a really fun way for students to discuss evidence, to discuss rhetoric, to discuss expertise, and understand who is actually engaging in these conversations. And this helps people explore these controversies from multiple perspectives. We can see here that AI, again, has been very helpful. Before automation, there was 1 to 3 controversies per week, and now there's 5 to 10 controversies per week. Under our controversies, we also have several election portals. As I mentioned earlier, a key part of understanding our news platforms or the things that we're sharing online is understanding that we are participating civically. So if we're sharing something on elections, if we're sharing something about political figures, it's really important to actually understand what their stances are on certain things. And that's exactly what our election portals are meant to do. So this is our election portal from the US election of 2024. And you can see where different news sources fall, a sort of overview of what came out of it. And if you click on election issues, it shows you exactly where political figures that are, pertinent to these elections stand on particular issues. And once again, you can click on them and see exactly what they're saying. And we've so far done the USA, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Bangladesh, and we're hoping to do it again for the US in 2025.
And I don't think it's on the slide, but the prediction markets are sometimes in there too. So if there's a prediction market that's related to the topic, I found that really interesting as well. That isn't a topic I've necessarily broached with my middle schoolers yet, but I know prediction markets are a big deal. And it was interesting to me that sometimes with those issues, you'd also get some insight into what prediction markets are talking about.
Yes, we have a partnership with Metaculus, which is essentially, I believe, what you're talking about. And in a lot of our stories, and also in a lot of these deep dives or context stories or under the election portals, it'll show you what is sort of being predicted. And that's a really cool way to kind of get a gauge of beyond our controversies, what is being said. I definitely think that is an interesting feature. And I feel like this leads us a little bit into Orwell. Obviously, we're talking about framing, rhetoric, what our platforms are teaching us to notice, and satire makes a lot of sense in this part of the conversation. Orwell works very differently from Verity, but it asks a very related question, kind of, which is how do exaggeration, absurdity, and parody reveal logics of propaganda and normalization? So it's not that satire is something that automatically clarifies everything about our political climate, but it's because it gives students another way to sort of read power, language, and framing. I'm sure a lot of us and a lot of students are reading books by George Orwell in their English classes, and they're understanding the commentary that he's making. And we sort of use Orwellian language and in order to sort of poke fun or satirize current news. So, for example, if you saw the news story about the Meta A glasses actually filming people, there's a funny little comment here about Meta A glasses, the guy who's watching you through the Meta A glasses also seeing you read the terms of service and being shocked. So that pokes fun at that, but obviously it's satirical. And it can be something a little more serious, like the FBI can surveil you without evidence and they call it an assessment instead of an investigation. And we have it posed here as a fun fact. I think what's particularly interesting about Orwell is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of students are looking online for their news. And the way that the Orwell website is organized is to sort of look like a Twitter feed or an X feed, a social media feed. So students can kind of scroll through this and they can take a look at what the news is and they can sort of try and identify what is this poking fun at? What is the real story that accompanies this story? And what is it kind of pointing out about that news story? And this finally brings us into Verity Ed, which is the sort of educational branch that we mentioned earlier, which is taking all of this information about, how we determine bias, what exactly our website's features are, how we can understand satire, and turning those into teachable lessons. So I have a question here. Does anyone here know if media literacy is legislatively mandated? So do governments require you to teach this in your classrooms?
In some states. We just had a really good webinar last week about what's happening in New Hampshire. And then the work of Illinois and California, I think, are kind of leading the country. We have an unfunded mandate here in North Carolina, so I think it really is distributed around the United States. Finland is
Hmm.
doing a lot, but
Yes.
it not as much here in the
So,
States.
yep, New Jersey does mandate it. I think this is really interesting because it seems like such an important thing to include, but as you can see from this chart here from Media Literacy Now, they also did a Civics Now survey in 2023 that found that 75% of states acknowledge the importance of media literacy, but it's only mandated K through 12 in 3 states, which is Delaware, New Jersey, and Texas. So there are standards and frameworks that are being led, but it's not something that's necessarily being implemented everywhere. This is something that we saw, and we thought, how can we take this and teach our students to responsibly read the news? How can we make it easier for people to implement media literacy into their classrooms? How can we make it so that this is actually something that's more broadly taught than just being enacted into 3 states? So our mission is to build a free media literacy platform for educators. We want to help students analyze framing, evaluate conflicting perspectives, and also have the ability to connect history to current media coverage. And this kind of shifts the focus of this presentation from tool adoption to instructional design. So to sort of understand what we're doing here at Verity Ed. So at Verity Ed, which is through our Substack, we have 3 lesson types. We have curriculum lessons. So curriculum lessons are based on these national curricular standards. They try to be the easiest ones to implement in your classroom, so you don't have to make a lot of changes and you don't have to question whether or not they do adhere to those curricular standards. We also have behind the scenes lessons. You noted that something important is to really understand the sources, understand where this like journalistic standard is coming from. So our behind the scenes lessons are sort of given to understand how Verity operates. How do we determine bias? How do we determine what a fact is? What do our volunteers do? Do our different team members do? What are we doing behind the scenes as an organization? And then we also have more general lessons. These cover things like current events, kind of lessons that teachers can look at more so as articles themselves that you don't necessarily need to talk about in classrooms. And we hope that through these 3 sort of lesson types, we kind of reach an overarching transparency, education, and also some interest for teachers. Another thing that we've done is we've just launched our classroom grant. So what we want to do here is support classroom pilots. We are providing $1,000 to 20 teachers to improve lessons based on classroom use. The important thing here is that we really value educator judgment. So we understand that a very important part of teaching is getting the feedback from actual teachers who might be teaching it in places that don't already have media literacy being implemented, or spaces where they might not have as much time since teachers are incredibly busy to actually create these lessons. So the idea here is for us to work with teachers to create these lessons, have them implemented, and then really understand if they're having an impact on media literacy or not. We're also working on an explainer video series. So really small, short videos that you can show in your classrooms if you want to really briefly explain to them what is bias? What is a fact? What are the principles of journalism? And we also are creating a fact search engine. So this is a really cool tool where you'd be able to put in keywords or key phrases, and it'll show you some key facts. This is a really useful research tool because it also shows you citations. You can group citations, and it also can show you where the citations or the sources that you save fall on that spectrum that we talked about, which is the left to right and establishment, anti-establishment. You can see here that we have some content that I'm presenting here. So how social media shapes the news. This shows you exactly how these algorithms work. We also have our excellent group of volunteers who help us out, who talk about what the experience was like for them. And we also talk about some very real issues and try to present that in a way that's easier for teachers to do. So how can you read a headline, not just about Iran, but how can you talk about conflict to your students in a balanced way, in a way that doesn't really increase any polarization or start arguments or debates? The way that we design our lessons is through UBD. UBD is understanding by design, and it's kind of called like a backward design. And it asks us to start with what we want students to understand. Then we ask what evidence would show that this learning is actually occurring, and only then do you begin by actually planning the activities. We think this is the right approach here because it means that we start with what we actually want the outcome to be, and then we only work our way back then. So we're not just starting with random activities that might not actually have an impact. What are our desired results? We've created these 5 learning standards in order to sort of see if media literacy is actually being implemented. These were informed by, Illinois's Crosswalk of Academic Standards or Delaware's Board of Education, but these are the ones that we use when we prepare every lesson and also use when we're helping out with our grant. So the first one is understanding that information is constructed. The second one is being able to distinguish between claims, evidence, and providing reasoning. The third is verification practices. The fourth is perspective awareness. And the fifth is responsible media participation. So understanding the civic implications of them being online and using information. Beyond that, we also see that AI is hitting education in a very big way. Through Google, we see that AI is no longer a separate tab. They're partnering with large educational organizations like Khan Academy to create AI that checks your essays for you. OpenAI has an AI for countries initiative, and this reframes AI as policy infrastructure. It's not just classroom software anymore. We also see nationwide system pilots with XAI in El Salvador, and we also see that students themselves are using AI more than ever. I think there was a RAND study the other day that found that I think approximately like 60 something percent of students are using it to help with their homework on a daily basis. So the thing about AI is that it can sometimes be harmful. I think the biggest issue here is cognitive offloading. So when we teach students about how we use AI, we want to ensure that they're not just putting into ChatGPT, hello chat, can you please write me an essay? But instead it works kind of like Google and Khan Academy's partnership, where the AI is a dueling partner that helps you fix your essay that you've already written yourself and you've already found sources for yourself. And that's the important thing that we're trying to teach at Verity Ed, which is how can we identify sources? How can we do this research? How can we trust information? And how can we argue ourselves? And obviously, it's really important to keep in mind some of the harms of AI, which is it's hard to trace the origin of information, which happens especially with hallucinations, whether it's providing images that have 3 arms or it's providing information that's entirely false that a student might not double check or think to double check. And it's also simply the fact that sometimes the AI is trained on human-generated data, and this can reflect or amplify bias. So if students aren't actually cross-checking multiple sources, they might fall prey to falling into this bias. So here it's more so about not should we use AI, but rather how can we help our students think well inside these AI mediated systems. You can see here that this is something that we really try to do. Bubble Trouble gets at echo chambers and algorithmic worlds, how social media shapes the news, as I mentioned earlier, kind of teaches students to look at some certain examples of where the news was misinterpreted and was spread falsely in order to understand how that process operates. We have reading between the results page. So understanding what is Google showing me when I search something up? What is an AI summary? What does it mean when this pops up first versus when it doesn't pop up first, which is really useful for younger students who are just learning how to navigate. And we also have mis and disinformation, which is understanding why mis and disinformation might spread, what exactly it is. Is everything we're reading fake news, or are we just misinterpreting what we're reading? What we try to do is really treat platforms as objects of inquiry. We're not taking everything that's being said on every news platform or social media platform as the truth, but rather it's what we are noticing about these platforms. So this is the really important idea of all of this, which is that they're not shortcuts around thinking. Rather, it's about what they teach us to notice. So that's all I really have to share for everyone today. I have these three questions here that I want us to end on and maybe get into some breakout rooms about. And if anyone has any questions as well, I'd be happy to answer them.
Emma, you have done a great job with the timing of your slides because we do have
Okay.
time for breakout rooms. And I want to encourage everybody to not jump off the call because I think it scares some folks who may not be as familiar with our platform. This is not a gotcha, and you do not have to uh, feel however you want. I'm not going to tell you how to feel, but our intent is to not make you feel like you're on the spot. It's to really give you an opportunity to make some connections. So I have created 3 breakout rooms that puts about 5 or 6 of us in each room. And what I'm going to give everyone is 10 minutes to encourage you to say hi and respond. If you want to go ahead, I'll put these once we get into the breakout rooms into the chat. These are great questions that we can challenge, but please join me in giving a round of applause. Emma, you did a great job. It's wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms, and you can go ahead and click join. And I will bring us back here in about 10 minutes. I'm going to pause the recording. The breakout rooms will not be recorded. Get to our. All right. Well, welcome everybody back from breakout rooms. We had some good dialogue in room 2, and I'll just give an opportunity if anybody would like to give voice either to questions and discussions that happened in your room or anything that you want to throw out there. Anna, you were not in our room, but Jeremy was. Well, there are 2 Annas here, I guess. But one of the questions was in terms of the human vetting or the human part of this after the AI kind of hands off to the humans, like how many folks is that? And can you give us a little more just of a picture of what that looks like? That was one of our questions in our room.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of like a big picture, there's 25 of us on the editorial team. Some of those are part-time workers, some of them are seasonal, so students working in the summer when they're off. So, but we have a good amount, maybe like 15 people working full-time day to day. So that's sort of a big picture numbers. In terms of individual stories, they go through usually those, so an editor, one single editor will decide, will pick up a story they want to cover. They'll use the AI to draft it. They'll review it. Same editor will review it. It then gets passed to someone on the management team who will review it and then approve it. Sometimes it'll be sent to me as well if it's a more sensitive story and they want just sort of like a final pair of eyes before it goes out, or if there's a reason to send it like another view. And then once that's completed, we also have people from Jeremy's team, so the digital curators, who will give it one last read just to fact check it again and then check it for typos. So I guess I'm counting on my fingers as I go through that. That's 3 or 4 people for each story gets reviewed by a human.
That's great. One of the things I mentioned I'm trying to do with my middle schoolers when it comes to the lessons they're allowed to use AI with is trying to get them to document as fully what their interaction with the AI was. And I think the degree to which platforms are able to do that can be helpful, just giving some more perspective on that. I'm going to put Emma on the spot and let you share a little bit about what happened in your breakout room. And then if anybody's willing, we can also grab the mic. We have a small number of folks here, but if you want to raise your hand or whatever, would love to just, give voice to some of those conversations that happened in the breakout room. Emma, what did y'all talk about in your room?
I would say our room was definitely a little more AI focused. So, what role AI plays in education? Amber posed a really interesting question, which was, okay, well, we talked about the issues with AI, but what am I supposed to do with AI in the classroom? I sent in a Verity Ed article that we had written, but I think also things that you're talking about, like keeping a log of like what people are doing and how students are actually using it, is very important. I think obviously Amber's question is really telling that there still needs to be a lot more lessons talking about, you're going to teach this, but your student might go home and do the homework assignment with AI, or they might open up their laptop and when you're asking the question, they might answer it with AI. So what can you as a teacher do to acknowledge the fact that they're using it, but also try and keep critical thinking alive? So that was a very interesting kind of opening thing, which is that this is definitely something that needs to be focused on in creating lessons for teachers. Carol also talked about how, in her university experience, there's a really interesting ethical question here of, if a teacher is using AI to create their questions or their curriculum or their lessons and their assignments, why is it that they're banning their students from doing so or disabling their students from doing so entirely? And so the question here is, why is the teacher allowed to? Why are the students not allowed to? That was a really interesting small discussion we have. And Alexandra talked about how, in different companies she's worked at, sometimes they tell you, run with it, use AI, and sometimes they tell you, don't use AI at all. We want you to keep the human thinking alive. So it was really interesting to see sort of how in different institutions in different places, the way that we encounter it and the way that we're told to use it is completely different. But we have a new generation of people who are going to be raised entirely with it, and they have to be prepared.
Um, Well, I'm thinking it would be wonderful to have some different teachers just in a little sort of workshop present a lesson using a tool. We were talking about ground news and all sides as well as Verity, but seeing how those lessons are being used and kind of be a student in the room to see how teachers are approaching this. I know that I am being encouraged to try and talk about more current events because of polarization and a lot of things I've been hesitant to do that, but I really feel like equipping my students to grapple with the news and to consider sources and to be interrogating this is definitely something that they need to do. Randall's put into the chat, in addition to newsletters, where he might think about putting together daily news videos that could possibly be replaced by his broadcast news. I know that I'm teaching broadcast media for middle school next year, and just the idea of an explainer video and how students, again, that would be performative. They would need to be creating that and doing that. But I've wrestled with this on other projects because when my students use AI, their scripts are at a much higher level, but maybe almost I don't know. I did cross-examination, speech and debate for 4 years in college. I think it's a great activity. And like being able to respond to a cross-examination, I don't know. I'm thinking about those kind of things as far as how that plays in with video. Emma, you had some debate background too. Didn't we talk about that early on? Yeah.
Yes, I did definitely have debate background. So I think a lot of the things I talk about, especially when it comes to the website features, I think it is really helpful. The way that I did it was you didn't even have preparation. You had like 15 minutes, you went
Yeah.
into the room and you gave a speech. I think
Yeah.
that's a really
Oh, yeah.
easy way to force people to use
Yeah,
their,
extemporaneous speaking and impromptu
yes.
speaking were things that we did, and the authenticity of that, is something I'm wanting to turn to in the age of AI. Well, we have time for a couple more comments or questions. Would anybody else be willing to give some voice to either conversations from your breakout room or throw out a question? Hey, we've got members of the Verity team here, so we can put them on the spot with a really tough question at the end.
Okay, I have a tough question. Um, for the Verity team, you have your group of decision makers, your human creative curators, do you compare them versus what AI would have done? So to see if the different
And
decision,
how do you manage disagreement? We could add that on because I bet sometimes
right,
there may be some differing opinions.
right,
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer the first question from Randall, we don't compare on a daily basis, like the human versus AI, but we do at various stages when we're trying to improve our AI models, and also when we were originally doing this. So when we were trying to decide, for instance, which AI model was best and which prompt was best and how to tweak our prompts, we were directly using stories that we had written, or like stories that we'd written news articles on, so we could look at what our humans had put together, what our humans had picked out as the narratives, what they had picked out as the facts, and then comparing that to the AI as well as the writing style. And we do periodically refine our prompt and refine our models, see if there's a better one that's come out. So at those stages, we do compare. And we also put it out to the team at one point to see, like we did a little competition to see if they could tell which one was AI and which one was human and which one was better. And we always got sort of 50-50 guessing each article, which was great for us because it showed that you really couldn't tell that much which one was which. We were doing a good job on both sides. Yeah. And then, sorry, Wes, can you remind me your question?
Disagreement. Do you ever have a situation where there's like some real disagreement? How does that get sort of vetted or decided?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is sometimes disagreement on like topics. We cover controversial topics predominantly. We focus very much on the different sides, the different debate. And I think, the fact that we've we've got a team that's very varied in terms of perspectives, political leanings, regions. So we do all have different perspectives. And I think everybody's really good at voicing their perspectives very respectfully and just steel manning the argument. So we actually encourage that, and we find that it's really helpful if someone reads an article and says, "Hey, actually, I don't agree with the way that this left narrative is written, or I would add this element." That's actually really helpful to us because then we can go in and add that. And we also encourage feedback from our readers as well. If there's, somebody who thinks, or even you're missing this argument, we've seen this establishment critical perspective that's going around and it's not included in your story. We will either go back and add it in, and it's really helpful for us, or if there's continued coverage of that, we might go and look for that particular perspective that we can add in as one of our cynical narratives or establishment critical narratives. So we love disagreement is the short answer. We encourage it.
That is fantastic. Well, we have gone just a few minutes over the hour, but can you please join me in thanking Emma, the Verity team, for sharing their platform, sharing the background. As I talked to Emma, I said, I know we want to know about your platform and the background, but we want to delve into these questions of how are we able to interrogate media? How is AI playing a role and really hopefully be a catalyst for us as educators and game designers and citizens and all the different hats that we wear. So thank you all so much for joining us. And I want to encourage everyone to connect. We'll have the archived recording of this available on our Media Education Lab webinars channel. It'll be on the website, and there'll be, as there always are, resources to continue to dig deeper. So I want to remind everybody our next Media Ed Club will again be the first Monday of the month, because that will be on May the 4th. And the year is just rolling quickly to an end here in North America. But we're all over the world. This is a wonderful thing about our community. Please, if you don't already subscribe to the newsletter for the Media Education Lab, one of the best ways to stay in touch. Thank you all so much for attending. We wish everybody the best. Hope your spring is going well. We hope to see you again soon through the Media Education Lab. Keep up the great work. Keep on promoting this Mardi Gras float of media literacy that we need more and more people to be a part of and contribute to. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.